Welcome to Anxious Like You, a podcast hosted by Micheline Malouf and Nadia Adesi, two therapists who are anxious like you. In each episode, Micheline and Nadia dive into their guests' experience with anxiety and give you the tools you need to face your anxiety head on. This podcast is made in collaboration with Dive Through, a mental wellness company.
Welcome back to Anxious Like You. Today we're speaking with Najwa Zebian, a Lebanese Canadian activist, author, speaker, and educator. Her search for a home was central to her early years as she struggled to find her place within the world.
On today's episode, Najwa draws on her own experiences of displacement, discrimination, and abuse. She uses her words to encourage others to build a home within themselves, to live, love, and create fearlessly.
Najwa will be giving us tips to combat narcissistic relationships, trauma bonds, and self-compassion. And her new book, Welcome Home, will be out on June 1st, 2021, where you'll be able to discover self-love, forgiveness, clarity, compassion, and peace within. Welcome back to our episode of Anxious Like You. We have Najwa Zebian here, and we're just going to dive right into the difficult questions. So the first question I have for you is, you immigrated to Canada from Lebanon at age 16. How did that impact your mental health?
Every time I think of that experience of moving here at that delicate age, I think that my life went from being fully in color to being black and white. I was really miserable during that time. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel like I mattered at all, because I came from a place where, I speak Arabic. It's my first language. Even though I spoke perfect English, now I'm in a place where everything is different. I have to always be speaking in English. I look different. At the time I wore the hijab, and I come from a different culture. I come from a different religion. So I really felt like I didn't fit in at all. So instead of trying to kind of bridge that gap at 16, you don't really know that, right? You just shut down. And that's what I did. I shut down. I used to write in my journal before that. I stopped writing because writing meant feeling, and feeling was just way too painful, because I felt like, what's the point of being aware of the pain if there's nothing I can do about it? So I just shut down. I really felt like I was just, a number in the world. I was just functioning. I would go to school. I did really well in school. Academically, I was doing really well. And I think quite a few people out there can relate to this, is that when you're doing well in school, everyone just assumes, or at your job or whatever it is, everyone assumes that you're fine, that there's nothing wrong with you. But I was miserable on the inside. That was the least of my worries, whether I did well in school or not. So it was a difficult experience.
Did you speak English when you moved to Canada?
I did speak English at the time. So my mom spoke to me in English since I was, a little kid. So when I came here, people assumed that I came from a different school, not from a different country. So that thankfully wasn't a barrier, but then, that opens the door for people to understand that moving to a new country doesn't always just have to do with the language. There's so much more that's packed into it. So many different languages other than actual spoken language. Like there are cultural expectations. There are, things that are really rooted in shame, that you come here and it's like everybody else is doing them, and you go through kind of a crisis, like an identity crisis. Like you are confronted with this whole new world, and you really don't know how to perceive it, and you don't know how to react to it. And that's what I went through. So I think I made the choice of not dealing with it at all. And yeah.
So you shut down, and you were kind of just isolating yourself because of that shock. And when you speak of the shame with that new culture, and is it your culture that you felt ashamed of moving to Canada, or was it the culture that you came into, or a completely different sense of shame?
Yeah. So I didn't see my culture as shameful, and I also didn't see that the culture that I was arriving into was shameful either. I'm the type from a very young age, I've been very non-judgmental. But I had a very strict religious upbringing, and I attended an Islamic school back home, and religion played a huge role. And at the time, certain rules were so ingrained with shame, but you don't know that at 16. You don't know that growing up, especially if everyone around you lived that same reality, whatever it was. So when I came here, being confronted with everything I used to see in the movies and in TV shows that I knew was somehow wrong or shameful, now I was actually living among people who were living that way. And I had to make the conscious decision for myself through time to say, where I come from isn't shameful, and where I am coming to, you know, I can't perceive that as shameful either. I have to decide what I truly believe on the inside. And I think that's when I refer to this in Welcome Home as unveiling. And it's not just about physically unveiling. I started to go back to all of the layers that I had kind of built around me to, you know, to become the person that I am today, and say, if I could go back and unlearn that, would I still choose to have that learning in my life today? If I could go back to the moment when I made the decision, for example, to wear the hijab, would I make that decision in my life now? So there was a lot of conscious awareness of what is shame, and why did I think for so long that that's not shame, that's just simply the difference between right and wrong. And coming to terms with that allowed my inner self, my authentic self, to really shine through, and to shine through unapologetically without having that same influence that shame had on my life from a very young age. Yeah.
Can you pinpoint a time when that started happening, or was it a conscious decision? Was it something that you sat down and thought about?
I would say this process began at around the age of 26, 27. I'm 30 now, so it's quite recent. And I had gone through an experience in you know, with an older person in my community, where I felt like really attached, and I felt like I just wanted attention, and I was really crushed by that. And being crushed by that got me to a point to ask myself, why am I in so much thirst for, you know, someone to see me, for someone to see my value, for someone to validate me? And that's what took me back to my childhood. And going back to my childhood, I had to go back to all of the teachings that I was taught. I had to go back to everything that my environment and my school taught me was right and wrong. And in the process of doing that, I could fully deconstruct for you what it was that made me so vulnerable and so ashamed of that vulnerability. What it was that made me perceive my sensitivity for so long as something that I needed to hide, as something that was that was a weakness that put me at a disadvantage. So all of this happened pretty recently, and when I was 28 years old, that's when I took my hijab off, and that was a little bit later in my awareness. I think people think because it's such a visual thing, you know, she came to that awareness when she took her hijab off, like there's a different life that she's living. But no, I started that process of awareness 2 years before that, and taking my hijab off was part of it. And it wasn't to say this was something that was wrong for me to wear. It was just to say the person that I am today wouldn't make the decision to wear it, because my understanding of it isn't the same understanding that it was when I was younger. So for anybody listening thinking, you know, I'm too old to begin my change, or I've already made these commitments or whatever, a very powerful thing a friend of mine once told me was, when I was 13 years old, I used to wear like 3 different layers of colors of eyeshadow, like 3 different blues. And if I were to tell myself, just because I made that decision at 13 years of age, that I have to stick to it for the rest of my life because I made that decision, I would be miserable right now. You have to be open to the fact that you will go through different phases in your life. And there are certain decisions that might seem like, I will never do something beyond this. I will never do something different from this. But you change, you evolve. You have the right to say, I liked this at one point and I don't like it anymore. Like, give yourself permission to be human and to not feel so badly about changing your mind about something.
Mm-hmm. I love
That's
that.
such a great point, and something I really resonate with. And I think a lot of my clients and followers as well, is when we're going back to try to unlearn something, it's hard not to come from a place of judgment of who we were at that time and who we are now. So having the open mind of, you're human, you liked it then, you don't like it now, is such a good mindset.
Yes, absolutely. And I think people get stuck on how they will be perceived by those around them. Like, oh, what are they going to think? Like when I took my hijab off, I remember the things that crossed my mind were, they're going to think that I want to show my body, and that's a shameful thing. They're going to think that I'm a bad person. They're going to think that I am abandoning my culture, my religion, my family. And I had to just say, stop seeing yourself through the eyes of others and see yourself through your own eyes, because you will never, ever, ever, ever at any moment in your life be on everyone's good side. It's impossible. There's always going to be someone who has an opinion about your opinion. There's always going to be someone who, something that you see as fundamentally right, they're going to say, I don't think it's right. And you have to be okay with that, because who you are doesn't depend on someone else saying that it's okay. Yeah.
You have to stop seeing yourself from everybody else's eyes. That is so powerful.
Absolutely.
I think we all struggle with that a little bit, especially when we come from a childhood of trauma. And, we learn to fawn, we learn to people please, we learn to really want to be accepted.
Yeah, story of my life up to a certain point.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I want to go there with you. I want to know, the story of your life. I know you've talked about being a sensitive individual from a young age. You were very sensitive. You've also talked about being bullied and various traumas you've experienced. Can you tell us more about your experiences growing up and what led to you becoming who you are today?
So from as long as I can remember, going back to being very, very young, I've always been aware of the fact that I am a very sensitive person. I'm very receptive to the energy in the room. If somebody's sad, I could pick up on that. If somebody changes the tone that they're speaking with, I can pick up on that. And so, long story short, my parents met, got married in Canada, then they moved to Lebanon after having 5 kids. And then I was the 6th and I came years later. So all of my siblings were considerably older than me and my parents were considerably older than me. So I grew up around adults and I had to mature very early, because that's what you start reflecting your environment. If everyone around you is speaking as an adult, you start speaking as an adult from a very young age. And I'm the only one in my family who is as sensitive as I am. I'm the only one who will openly, want to be empathetic towards someone, will openly want to help someone. And it's overwhelming when you compare it to the rest of my family. So I've always been aware of that, but at around, I would say the age of 8 or 9, I started sensing that it was inconvenient for those around me for me to be as sensitive as I was. It was inconvenient for them to deal with the level of emotion that I experienced. And so I internalized it to mean that something's wrong with me. So I'll give you an experience. When I was in school, I would always want to do the right thing. Always. Like if my peers wanted to make fun of the teacher, I was the one who would say no, like that would hurt her feelings or that would hurt his feelings. And I was automatically excluded because I wasn't willing to take part in negative experiences or in causing anyone else harm. And so I kind of internalized that, you know, something's wrong with me for being this way. Something's wrong with me for always wanting to do the right thing. And so I started learning behaviors at a young age to just not voice myself, to just kind of keep it in, like observe everybody around me. Maybe I'm still choosing to not take part in certain things, but I'm not going to advocate for that because it just further leads to more exclusion. And, you know, that kind of bullying that took place where I was always made to feel like, you know, something's wrong with me for always wanting to do the right thing. It continued throughout my high school years. And, you know, the students in my class got to a point where they were really cruel. And I you know, I don't judge them for it. They were children too. But it got to a point where they would all plan to, you know, laugh at a certain time. Like at 1:58 p.m., we're all going to start laughing, and no one would tell me that. And then everybody would start looking at me and I would feel like I missed something. And so they did really cruel things. And it further pushed me to want to be isolated because I felt like I didn't know how to function in a world like this. So I only had one friend, and this friend didn't even live in the same village that I lived in. And I just spent my time, you know, studying and doing really well in school. My mom had started traveling to Canada ever since I turned about 8 years old to stay with my older siblings who all made their way here when they grew a bit older. And so I really didn't have that consistent person who I could come home to at the end of every day and say, this is what happened with me today. So I learned to just deal with things on my own by really not dealing with them, but just by pouring myself into school, by pouring myself into, you know, doing things that made me feel like I was part of something, like helping a teacher out, like, you know, going to other classrooms and helping other students out. So again, looking at it as an adult, that's where the going out of my way to help every single person out there came from. That's where feeling like I have to overexert myself in being there for others and doing things for others and saying things to others, I derived my whole well-being from that. And I'm still going through a process of catching myself when that happens. Like, are you actually doing this for someone because you want to and because you have the energy to do it? Or is there a part of you that feels like by doing this, you're going to feel better about yourself by doing that? Even though you are completely depleting yourself, you're completely exhausting yourself, and you convince yourself that doing it will make you feel better. And it does. And then you hit a wall and you're like, I can't do this anymore. And at that point, anyone that you've served doesn't even know that that's happening to you because they don't think that you were using that to somehow fuel yourself, but it's like empty fuel. It's not real. It's virtual. You know, it's a cloud that's going to move, that's going to go away. Yeah, sorry, that was a really long, I shouldn't apologize, but that was a really long answer.
No, you shouldn't apologize. That was a beautiful answer. It's so introspective. And, you know, I feel like a lot of people have those same types of feelings. You start to feel like, you know, you want to be seen, you want to be a helper, you want to be seen in the positive light. And maybe that's the only attention you got, you know, maybe growing up, you know, you said your family was, you know, really more serious and not so sensitive. I don't know if serious is the word you used, or I'm just kind of attaching that, but you know, you were the one that was really sensitive, and your mom was not really there all the time when you were being bullied at school. So of course you're going to want to be getting some sort of attention, some sort of way, and some sort of, you know, feeling like you're worthy. You know, this is my self-worth. This is the issue with people pleasing and fawning, is we develop that, like, this is my identity. This is who I am. Like, who am I? if I set boundaries? Who am I if, you know, people aren't praising me for being so nice? Or
the thought of not having any of that used to be terrifying to me. Like, that's why I never learned about boundaries, because you're like, the moment I set a boundary, people are going to leave. I'm not going to be included. I'm not going to be part of something. So boundaries just go out the window. You're just like, what are boundaries? Boundaries mean I'm selfish and I'm already trying so hard to be part of something. So, you know, I'm willing to break myself to be part of something. I did that for my whole life. And you know, you get to a point where you're like, if I can't belong to my own world, no other world is worthy of me being in it, you know, like, because I'm not showing up as myself. I'm showing up as a version of myself that so badly wants to be part of something. And there's an element of that, the lack of authenticity, that, you know, obviously isn't intentional, but there's an element of that that's like, why do you even want to belong in a world where you can't be yourself? You're willing to change yourself in a way just so that you could say someone loves me. But then when you say someone loves me, they're not really loving the real you. They're loving the you that's hidden so many parts of herself, that's pretending to be a certain way. And once you just let go of that and say, I am going to be myself and the rest of the world will act accordingly, that's when you get people walking into your life and saying, you know what, she doesn't fit into my life, so I'm going to leave. And you'll be okay with that. Like, you won't be like, oh, that must mean I must change in a certain way to fit into that person's world. No, I am in my own world. If our lives fit together, they fit together. And if they don't, I will continue being myself and the right people will walk into my life. Like, that is so liberating. And I feel like if so many people out there lived by it, we wouldn't have as many, you know, unnecessary relationships. We wouldn't have so many, and I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. I'm talking about family ties. I'm talking about friendships. I'm talking about jobs. I'm talking about degrees. You know, if you could just ask yourself, what is it that truly and genuinely reflects me? And I think one of you guys made this video where it's like, you know, when you don't walk into a room and say, are they going to like me? Walk into a room and say, do I like everyone around me? Like, what do I think? Just when you ask yourself that question, inside of me, I start crying, because I'm like, I lived for so many years where I didn't ask myself that question, where that question wasn't important. And why was that? It's because I didn't think that I was important, you know? Yeah, that was your motivational speech of the day.
That's awesome. And in your TED Talk, you talk about finding homes in other people, and you need to learn how to find it in yourself. Is this along the same lines?
Absolutely. Like, when you see yourself through other people's eyes, it's kind of like you're putting yourself under someone else's roof, not your own. That's why you might, on a logical level, be able to define what self-love looks like. You might be able to give the best advice you can to a friend of yours, but when it comes to your own experiences, because you don't see yourself through your own eyes, through your own home, you see yourself through someone else's eyes, which means you see yourself through their home, through their perspective. You will never act upon the knowledge that you have, because it's not on your own foundations. When I talk about building a home within yourself, the foundation is the most important part, and that requires self-acceptance and self-awareness. If you aren't looking at yourself through your own self-acceptance and self-awareness, you're looking at yourself through someone else's self-acceptance and self-awareness. And when you do that, you're just a character in another story. You're not the main character in your own story. So I always say, the reason that we have a hard time letting go of people, or letting go of a dream, or letting go in general, is that we feel like we've invested so much of ourselves into that person. We've invested so much of ourselves into, I've worked for 8 years at this company, or my family has been there throughout my whole life. The reason that we struggle with letting go and walking away is that we feel like we don't know who we are without that, because everything we have within us, we've put there in hopes that that place, that person one day will say, I welcome you with open arms. And so you give and you give and you give. And when the time comes for you to walk away, you feel like, but what about all that stuff that I gave away? And in Welcome Home, I say, let them keep it. That shows who you are. The fact that you were able to create from within you so much love, so much kindness, so much empathy, so much understanding, so much forgiveness, so much giving someone so many chances, so much helping someone up. That shows how beautiful you are, but it also shows you that you are the source of all of that. You can build a home for yourself within. You have everything you need. You just need to sit and say, I am building this home within me. I am giving myself the priority. I'm putting myself at the top of my list. There's one room in Welcome Home called the Compassion Room, and I talk in it about self-compassion. And one activity that I walk the readers through is, imagine that you're having a dinner, you're hosting a dinner, and you write out your guest list. Are you on that guest list? Or do you just let people come in and you serve them and you give and you give and you give, and then they leave and you're exhausted, you haven't eaten, I'm like, you are at the top of that list. You give yourself what you give to others. And when you show yourself that kind of compassion, you won't even be able to accept any less than it from others. So you have to believe that everything that you have to offer, you deserve it before anyone else out there deserves it. And that is what building a home within yourself is all about.
Yeah. Wow. You had me on the verge of tears there when you're talking about like, let them have it. Like, cause that attachment that we create with others, it is so powerful, right? We become attached to the idea of who they were, who we wanted them to be, not necessarily who they are and what our relationship truly is. And we get caught up in, well, we have a home together, or we have, kids, or maybe we have 8 years, or, so many ifs and what ifs. And so saying, you know what, this is what that was for those 7 years or those 8 years. And that was kind of like when you were talking about, this isn't who I am anymore. Like, this is who I might have been then, but I'm not this person now. So maybe within that 7-8 years, you've come to be a different person now. And so, okay, let them have it. That's done. Let's start fresh. That's so deep and so powerful.
Yes. I think we look for closure by saying, I want you to give me back everything that I gave you. Like, there's a part of it that's like, I'm not going to rest before I get back from you what I gave you, or before I seek revenge, but that really, it's sad, because what you're looking for is just closure, and you're using that as an excuse to say, I can't move on, but you can. The most beautiful thing is to say, you know what? I gave what I gave, and I'm not going to be the type of person that will equate my happiness with seeing you suffer just because this didn't work out, it's soothing to think of that.
I actually want to read a part. This is a quote from your book, Sparks of Phoenix. And this one was just so powerful. You may not see them suffer like they made you suffer, but believe me, their biggest punishment is that they are who they are.
Yes.
Wow. So
you're looking to punish someone? Why? Like, why do you want to be that person? you know how we say an eye for an eye and the world is blind? Why do you want to be the person that actually allows the person who hurt you to make you someone you're not? Why? Right?
I think exactly what you said of how showing compassion will increase our self-worth. And once we have our self-worth, then we'll understand why doing that is not benefiting anybody.
No, it's not. And also looking at people as, like, when I think of that poem, I say it relieves a certain kind of pain to say it that way, but it now at the level where I am now with my awareness, I would have said, you might not see them suffer like they made you suffer, but they treated you based on where they are in their journey. They definitely, you know, maybe they sat there and said, I am intending to cause you pain, but understand that the way they treated you had nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with what they thought of themselves. If they really needed to put you down, to step on you so that they could feel more elevated, that says everything about them and not about you. If they decided to lie to you, that's a choice they made. It only means something about you when you say, it is my vulnerability that allowed me to, be lied to by someone. No, why are you blaming part of who you are, a reality of yourself, something that is actually really beautiful that the world needs? Why are you blaming that for their decision to do something? You could be as vulnerable, you could be lying down naked on the street. That does not give anyone permission to touch you, or it just doesn't. So stop saying it's my fault for the way that they treated me. They treated me the way they did because they chose to, period.
Nothing you do merits maltreatment from anyone.
No, like, think about yourself. Would you ever, how many times do you come across somebody who is really vulnerable, or you can see part of your younger self in them and just how naive they are? Do you choose to take advantage of them? No, you don't, because you're empathetic. You would never do that to someone. So stop saying to yourself that the way that one person treated you, it's because of who you are. Like, it's my fault. I was stupid. I should have shown them my strength. I should have. None of that was going to change anything at all. They were probably the wrong person for you anyway, Yeah.
There's such a big shift when we go from what's wrong with me to what happened to me.
Yes. You have to separate yourself from the experience. I think people struggle with this when I talk about it, because they're like, are you telling me that my trauma was my fault, or that it wasn't bad enough, or only if I see it differently, then that means that, it's better? And I say, no, that's not what I'm saying. Validate your own experience, but do not say this experience is, I caused this upon myself, or I brought this upon myself. This is something that happened to me. Maybe I made the choice. A lot of times when I say, like, you have to be compassionate with yourself and say, I forgive myself for not knowing then what I know now. And I have many people say, but I did know that this person was hurting me, and I continued being there. And I always say, well, that's part of your compassion towards yourself as well, is to say, I stayed not because I was actively wanting to be abused or lied to or manipulated or whatever. I stayed because I wanted love. But what I received in return was that. So that's the part where you say, that happened to me. It's not, my fault. It's not something I brought in. Yeah.
Yeah. And often, like, when we're in those like abusive relationships, we don't know. Yeah, we may know that we're not being treated well, but there's that cycle of abuse that I've talked about multiple times that keeps us, that honeymoon phase that's always there, that apology, the, coming back, that keeps us kind of hooked in that. And I know you have talked a lot about narcissistic relationships and gaslighting in your videos and in your posts on Instagram and on TikTok. Are you comfortable talking about your experience with these issues?
Yes, absolutely. I'll talk about them in a way where I don't feel like I need to give too much detail, but I'll give definitely what I learned. When it comes to narcissistic abuse, the first thing I'll say is it's very hard for someone who didn't experience it to understand it. And I am somebody who today will say, before you say that someone is a narcissist, ask yourself whether it was just that their behavior resembled that just because they wanted out. They just didn't want you anymore. You have to look at the experience as a whole. A lot of times when a relationship comes to an end, we really want to paint that person as a bad person so that we could hate them, so that we could really say, I'm better or I'm better off. But sometimes you just have to allow an ending to happen. But as somebody who did experience narcissistic abuse, and this would have been, I would say, about 7 years ago, I went into it not knowing what narcissistic abuse was. You don't really know it until you start trying to make sense of your experience. So I remember one day I was sitting in a social worker's office, and I would say that was the first time in my life that I actually sought help. And this man that I was, it wasn't a relationship. It was more of a situationship. I'm sitting in the social worker's office, and I had told him that I didn't want to talk to him anymore because it felt like I was constantly pouring kindness and empathy on this person. And what I would get back is, take a deep breath. Remember what we talked about. Take a few steps back. It looks like you're having a bad day. Breathe. And I'm just like, there's nothing wrong with me. Like, stop talking to me like this. And so I had said to him, I don't want to talk to you anymore. But I said it kindly. I said, I wish you the best. And because at that time, I still had that part of me that's like, I don't want to upset anybody. I don't want things to end on bad terms. So I'm sitting in the social worker's office, and I get a text from him that says, after 2 days of sending that message, that I didn't want to talk anymore. And his response to it was, you don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand your message, even though it clearly said, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I got a message from him saying much better. And so I let my social worker read that. And she said to me, he's gaslighting you. I was like, what? He's like, everything that you've told me shows me that he's gaslighting you. He wants you to think that the reality that you're experiencing is not the reality that you're experiencing. He wants you to be there on his own terms. You can't put an end to the relationship. He has to, and he will. Watch, he will. And it turns out that the much better was that, you're texting me a little bit less, which lessens my headaches. So thank you, much better. And so I didn't respond to that message. And then the next morning, very early in the morning, I got a message at 5 a.m. saying, are you awake? And I still didn't respond. And then I got another message, and it turned out that this person, actually, I'll give you a little bit more detail because it's interesting how this unfolded. So after getting a third message, and I responded saying, like, what's going on? He asked me to call him later that night. And I called, and I have this in a text message, okay? And you know that someone's been gaslighted when they tell you, I have proof. So I call at the end of the day, and I'm like, hello? And he's like, hello. And I was like, what's going on? And he's like, what do you mean what's going on? I'm like, you told me to call you. He's like, no, I didn't. And I'm like, yes, you did.
Oh my God.
So anyway, he dives into this, like, I'm really sad right now and I'm going through such a hard time and whatever. And obviously the empath in me is like, I want to save you. And so it turned out that he needed money. And what I was mistakening as, oh, he's opening up to me, he's, he really does care about me, whatever it turned out to be, it's a means to an end. And that was just one tiny experience from that whole situation. And so when I talk about narcissistic abuse, I'm always very sensitive to the experience of the victim, because someone who hasn't gone through it will look at you and say, like, how could you not see through that? And you're like, it doesn't happen right away. There's an example of they used to do this at the circus decades ago, where they would put a chicken on a hot plate, and they would start with like a little tiny bit of heat. You've probably heard of this before, just a little bit of heat. And then we increase the heat bit by bit so that, it would dance and people would be and would enjoy it and whatever. And I'm like, that's how abuse begins. It doesn't begin if you met someone today and they stormed at you with red flags, you would leave. You have no investment. But it begins bit by bit by bit, and the person will test the waters to see how much you're willing to accept, and it grows over time. Nobody walks into something that feels like hell from day one. You have a lot more self-worth at that point, but they chip away bit by bit so that your whole perception of reality is twisted. And instead of you, and that's the direct result of the gaslighting that they were able to get away with in the first place, because they could sense what you needed. So if you need love, they will shower you with love. They will give you what you need, so that you become so addicted and hooked onto it that every time they do or say something that breaks you down, you can say, but what about that love? Like, I want that love. And so I'll stay to get that love. And then bit by bit, that love goes away. And you're like, what's wrong with me for that love going away? Like, do I need to change myself? Do I need to go back to the way I was at the beginning? Do I need to? And you try so hard to be seen by this person the way that they saw you at the beginning, that you become somebody that you are not. And I experienced a moment of clarity where this experience went on for about 3 years, I would say. And there was one night where my dad actually, who I have a very distant relationship with him. And so when he says something, he really means it. And he said to me that the look that he used to see in my eyes, I talked about this in my TEDx, my very first one. He's like, I don't see that look anymore. And I went upstairs, looked in the mirror, and I genuinely did not see myself. That's what narcissistic abuse does to you. You abandon yourself so much that there is still a part of you that's like, I know who I was, and I really need to go back to being that person. But a big part of healing is saying, I can't go back to the person that I was before. Asking to go back to the person that I was before and putting that, or making that an indication of me healing, means I am asking to ungrow. I am asking for the experience that taught me or has the potential to teach me so much so that I never fall into this again. I'm wishing it away. I have to accept that I broke in a way that there is no way for me to go back to the person I was before. I am becoming someone new. I deserved love when I was whole, untouched. I deserved love as I was breaking. I deserve love as I pick up the pieces and put myself back together the way I want to put myself back together. So when it comes to healing, specifically from traumatic events, I always tell people what happened to you was 100% valid, but taking it away, which will never happen, you can never go back to the past and change it. Taking it away or trying to tuck it away and say that never happened, like I'm not, just as long as I don't think about it, it won't affect me. Doing that is not going to bring you the authentic healing that you need. Saying I went through that, it wasn't my fault, it happened to me, as we were saying earlier, that is what's going to get you to a place where you wear that trauma as a, yes, it might be a scar, and it might be a scar that you don't like the look of, but you wear it and say, I overcame that. I went through that. I overcame it. I am who I am. I am where I am, not because of it, but despite of it, you know? And so I think, I know, you know, we started with narcissistic abuse, but now we're talking about this, but narcissistic abuse can really, really like just make you, it brings you so much clarity on the person that you actually are and the person that you need to be versus the person you thought you needed to be to get love. Yes.
Wow. Is that what you meant by your quote? A lot of times we mistake love for abuse?
Absolutely. Yeah. You think that it's kind of like the slots, you know, when we talk about intermittent validation or reinforcement or whatever. You think that so at the beginning of a relationship that is narcissistic in its nature, you're getting all of that all the time, unsolicited, for free. You're showered with it. You don't think that it affects you until it starts going away bit by bit. And so the real damaging part is when it starts being taken away and you start having to change parts of who you are so that you could get it again. That's abusive and that's manipulative. And it's kind of like, I get so many people telling me, you know, my boyfriend or my girlfriend said, you know, once I expressed a need of mine to them, they said that the reason they're not meeting that need is because I'm not doing something for them. And, you know, I don't know what to do. And I'm just like, that is manipulative. Like, to hear that is manipulative, because if you are expressing a need to someone that you love, it doesn't have to be compared to something else. We deal with that need right now. And if you have a need that you need to discuss with me, then we discuss it afterwards or at another time. But don't tie your willingness and ability to give me love with a boundary that I've set. Don't do that, because when you do that, you're basically telling me, unless I let go of something that really brings me a lot of discomfort, and unless I break myself in a certain way, then you are not going to meet my needs. That's manipulative and abusive. And again, you don't see it as abuse so easily. Like, because it comes at a certain point, there's a cycle, right? You go through a cycle where that love is so diminished and you get to a point where you're fighting so hard for it. And right at the end of that fight, they give you love. And so you're like, next time they make you try a little bit harder and a little bit harder and a little bit harder. And it becomes like that light at the end of the tunnel where you're like, I can get there. I can get to a point where I know him or I know her and they're just going through a hard time. And I know they have the ability to give me that kind of love, but love shouldn't be that hard. Like, we grow up believing that love keeps you up at night, that it makes you lose weight, that it makes you lose sleep, that it makes you, because it's so depleting. But that's not love. That's not love. That's anything but love. And so if love, this is very powerful for me and powerful to anyone I say love feels like love. If it doesn't feel like love, it's not love. That's it.
Wow.
Ask yourself, in any situation that you go through, does this feel like love to me? Like actual love, that pure, I care about you. You can be fully yourself. I see you, I hear you, even though I don't agree with certain aspects of the way you live your life. I love you wholly and authentically. If it doesn't feel like that kind of love, it's not love. If it makes you feel like you need to, this whole, when we talk about compromise, if compromise means that you are letting go of a boundary that's very important to you, that's not compromise. Compromise is, you know, you like this kind of food and I like this kind of food. We go to a restaurant where I like the food one day and we go to another one where you like the food there. That's compromise. Compromise doesn't chip away at your values or at your comfort level. Or so again, at any moment where you feel like you have to make this drastic change about yourself, like a fundamental change that you know you're not comfortable with, in those moments, you have to ask yourself, does this feel like love? Because if it doesn't, then it's anything but that. So don't convince yourself that that's what it is.
Yeah. Love feels like love.
Yes.
That is true. Love feels like love. And it's true, because when you talk about the values, and it shouldn't, like, compromise should never chip away at your values. It should, yeah, like you said, it's a restaurant. You don't like olives. I like olives. Okay, let's not eat olives today, but whatever.
Yeah.
Something very minimal, nothing huge. And so actually it's funny, because in therapy, sometimes with my clients, I'll have them make a list of their values, and the values in terms of health, relationships, work, leisure. And then when we compare to the values that they want and the values that they want to see in their partner as well. And when they're in narcissistic relationships or unhealthy relationships, not necessarily just narcissistic relationships, those don't match up. And they're trying to compromise on those things. They're trying to compromise on commitment. They're trying to compromise on respect. They're trying to compromise on family, those big core values that we need in order to sustain a healthy relationship, right? So it's very, very, very important to know the difference between, the things that you can compromise on, and then the things that are non-negotiables. And they're not non-negotiables in terms of, okay, I want to live here and you want to live there. That could be a potential compromise as well. We're talking about non-negotiables in terms of who we see ourselves to be, what kind of life we want to have, and our values, right? So
yes,
very important.
And and I would say, just to add to that if we had the same level of clarity while we're in a relationship that we had before on those non-negotiables, on the things we're willing to compromise on, all that stuff, we can make the decision to leave when one of those things, like those major things, is broken. But I think what happens is we come in really strong, and then we form that attachment, and at some point it becomes, what am I willing to let go of to keep that person in my life? And honestly, we get to a point where we let go of ourselves to keep that person in our life. So I fully empathize with anybody going through an experience right now where they feel like the burden of keeping the relationship going is on them, and they really want it to keep working. But I also give you hope and say, there is no point in being in a relationship where you can't be fully who you are. And that includes being respected when it comes to talking about things like this, or feeling like your opinion matters, even though you might not end up with the decision that you hoped that the two of you would make. You still don't feel like you were belittled to get there. That's so important.
Yeah.
So important. I'm just still reflecting on the love feels like love. I got a physical sensation from that. It was like, I feel like with a therapist, it's so hard to get aha moments. And now I'm just going through all my relationships and my head has perspective. No, it's just so powerful. And it's almost like it shouldn't be that heavy, but it is.
Yeah. We're not taught that, because in Disney movies and in, all of the things we hear, like you said at the beginning of our conversation, that what the world shows you love is, and there was actually somebody posted an Instagram thing the other day where like, oh man, I have to find it and like show you, but they were talking about how the Disney princesses all show some sort of like bending over backwards to find this like Prince Charming and not becoming, who they are, like everyone trying to fit a mold. And that's what we grow up with. We grow up learning that in order to be in a healthy relationship, we need to, and especially culturally, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm, being Lebanese, Syrian as well, it was, this is what the wife does. This is what the husband does. And a lot of the female role comes from, making sure everybody's okay. And, growing up in a household where my brother wouldn't really be the one tending to people. I was the one tending to people. So you have to, you grow up thinking everyone else's emotions
are more important than mine. Yeah.
And it's your responsibility. So you
Yeah.
you go into that. So you get into those relationships, and the relationship doesn't feel like love anymore. It feels like you're working, or you're.
But you don't know that what love actually feels like, because you've never experienced it. Like, you've never been given the opportunity to ask yourself, or to even believe that you have the right to ask yourself, what does love look like to me? What does a relationship look like to me? I look at a lot of the relationships that are around me, and I tell myself, I never want that kind of relationship. I never want a relationship where I am just expected to have kids and cook and clean, and not even really have a relationship with the man that I'm with. It's like very functional. And if you're not that kind of, like, I grew up believing that a woman who wants her husband's attention is a selfish, I can't say the word on camera, but you're selfish.
Yeah.
You're selfish just for wanting to have a relationship with your husband. And I think people who come from that, it's not just our culture. I don't like painting our culture in a bad light, because I feel like different biases when it comes to women's roles. It's never easy being a woman anywhere in the world. There's always a certain image that you're supposed to uphold. There's always a certain image that you're supposed to, we tell you have freedom, but it's only within certain lines, certain boundaries. But I grew up thinking that, a husband and wife don't have a relationship outside of raising their kids, bringing money home, and that's it. Like, there is no such thing as affection, love, as saying I love you, there's none of that. And so, I grew up, I would say, malnourished of love, because it wasn't. And I know my parents thought that they were loving me, because they came from an upbringing that didn't emphasize any of that. So they thought, from their point of view, that they were doing the right thing. They never thought I'm not loving my daughter. They thought, I love my daughter very much, and love looks like providing for her. Love looks like feeding her. The love I needed was, I love you. I care about you. Let me give you a hug. And I never got any of that. It was only in really intense moments. So that's why I always glamorized getting that from someone. Just I want to hold you. And so I'm so grateful that I'm not married yet, because I honestly think I would have fallen into a very bad marriage, a very bad relationship, because I didn't know 3 years ago what a healthy relationship looked like, or that it's okay to express emotion when it came to relationships. Like, it's always been, you don't even get to know the person before you marry them. You can get to know them for 3 or 4 months. It's important to know who their family is. It's important, but the actual, me and the person getting to know each other, seeing whether we're compatible, seeing whether our ways of expressing love actually work for one another, none of that is important. That's what I used to think, because of just the environment that I was in, because of what I saw on TV. Now it's completely different. I know what I want in a relationship. I know what love looks like. I know what walking away looks like, really powerful stuff.
Yeah. I want to get into some of the questions our listeners had for you from our Instagram posts. So one of the questions was, what advice do you have for someone who doesn't think they're good enough?
The first question I'll ask is, good enough for who? Ask yourself, who is my audience? Who do I think of when I feel like I'm not good enough? Who sets that bar for me? What does being good enough even mean? If you were to write down a list of all the things you needed to be good enough, what would that list look like? And genuinely ask yourself, do I believe that I need, me, not through the eyes of someone else, through my own eyes, do I really believe that I need to hit this and this and this and this to be good or good enough? And once you answer those questions, I guarantee you're going to say no to most of them, because each and every one of us, when we have a deep dive into ourselves, like just me with my own thoughts, we know the answers. We know what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. We know what's true and what's not true. But what we don't know is that we have the power to say no, is that we have the power to say, I don't want to be that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to say that. We're so afraid that if we actually allow our inner self to shine through, that those around us are going to walk away, or they're going to, I'm not going to speak in flowery terms, but, some people fear that their family will say, you're not part of us anymore. Some people fear that, their spouse will want a divorce. Some people fear, like, these are real issues. Mm-hmm. And again, I go back to what we said at the beginning. If your inclusion in someone's life depends on you becoming a version of yourself that is so far away from you, why do you want to be included in that? Why do you want to be in that world? And I know it's scary to say, but where else would I belong? But you won't know unless you let go. You don't know what the world you live in compared to the world that actually is probably this tiny, and the world that actually is so huge. And you see yourself through this small lens, through this small world that you're in. But you're not going to know the bigger world if you don't break out of this one. And once you do, change is hard. My family is very conservative, and I moved out of my parents' home before being married, and they obviously had a hard time with it. And I had a hard time with it, because my perception was, if a woman or a girl moves out of her parents' house, that means it's such a shameful thing, and why would she want to live on her own, and she's not married, she doesn't have anyone to protect her. I was really hard on myself. But when I look back at the experience, I'm like, that's one of the best things that happened to me. Because, or that not happened to me, that I chose to do, is break out of the little tiny world that I saw, that if I don't belong to this world, if I'm not good enough for the people in this world, then I'm not good enough at all. Breaking out of that made me the most powerful person in my life. I don't depend on someone to tell me, you are good enough, for me to feel like I am good enough. Honestly, I'm not just saying it to look good in front of people. Mm-hmm. I always, at any moment that I see a friend, a family member, whether it's close or far, that looks at me in a way where they really want me to feel like I'm less than myself, I imagine a power bubble around me that says, I see what you're doing, but I'm not going to internalize it. I genuinely do that. And I can feel like sometimes I'm like, why are they like that? Like, why can't they just accept the way that I am? And I'm just like, that's not up to me. Mm-hmm. It is not up to me to say, why doesn't someone change the way they think? What's up to me is to say, what they think of me doesn't define me, even though I'm aware of it. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with people not liking me. I'm okay with people thinking that certain decisions I make for myself are wrong or shameful. I'm okay with that, because I don't define the righteousness or the validity of something that I do or say, by the pleasure that it gives others. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. So good. I love the bubble. It's like this bubble around you, and whatever they say, you don't let it internalize. You always kind of turn to wonder, like, what makes them say that, but not necessarily take it inward. That's very powerful.
Thank you. I actually wrote about it in Welcome Home, and the people's opinions or judgments or criticisms, I imagine them as arrows, and I just imagine that they hit that bubble and they turn around, or they just fall. You don't have to You don't have to walk in the world being ignorant and not being receptive to what the world around you thinks. You're a human being. Just acknowledge it and say, okay, but this won't affect me.
Do you have any advice for somebody who's currently stuck in that trauma bond, who is aware that they're not necessarily in a good relationship, but can't seem to get out?
I would say, ask yourself, what are you actually, not your perception of what you're getting out of this relationship. What parts of your soul are being nourished by this relationship? And if you're in a trauma bond, the only thing you're nourishing is whatever root of that pain it is. It could be, I genuinely believe that I'm not worthy of being held on to. That trauma bond is soothing that for you because you think that someone is holding on to you. And that's enough. Like, you will do anything to avoid that reality that you believe about yourself to be true. So it is like you are getting a cure externally for a deeply fundamental problem that you have. And what you're trying to do is, instead of working on that problem, you are trying to avoid working on it by not letting go of that person. Because you know that the moment you let go of that person, you are going to freak out. You are going to panic. That reality is going to set in, and you're again going to tell yourself, see, I'm not worth it. In Welcome Home, I talk exactly about that. I talk about how I had to go back to my 8-year-old self, to an experience that showed me at that age that I wasn't worthy of being included in a family setting, that I wasn't worthy of receiving that feeling of you matter, you are part of us, and seeing how that pattern that led me to that conclusion it showed up in my life consistently. And in every experience where I found myself people pleasing or fawning or just overly extending myself, it was so that I could avoid that belief being coming as a reality in my life again. And so that's what we do with trauma bonds. You want to do anything to avoid going to that, because it hurts so much. Because when you go back to that belief about yourself, you're not just looking at this experience, you're looking at every other experience that proved that to you. See, I'm not worth it. And if this person doesn't hold on to me again, that's why we go back so many times. That's why we bargain and negotiate. Like, okay, maybe I was the one who overreacted. Maybe if I change parts of who I am, they'll stay. But that, you are diverting from your true, authentic healing. If you can tell yourself, it's going to hurt to let this person go, but I know that it's the right decision to make for myself, I am better off healing that wound that I have, like really going to the root and extracting it and say, I understand that I've been the way that I am my whole life because of believing this, but I'm going to go back to that 8-year-old or whatever age you were at when you solidified that reality about yourself or that thought about yourself and say, you believed this because that was your capacity at that age. That's the only conclusion you could come to. But it's not true. You are worthy of being held on to. It's just that the people who are around you made the decision to not hold on to you. And if you could go back and tell yourself that and repeat it to yourself over and over and over and do the work that is required to, the thing is, we come to that logical understanding, but our bodies hold on to things a lot longer than our mind holds on to them. And so, like, you'll find people going through this like cognitive dissonance where they're like, I know I'm in the wrong relationship. Like, I know what he did right now was gaslighting, but I'm staying, right?
Yep.
So you go through that and you're like, and why am I staying? Why am I accepting this? It's because there is a process of becoming aware of those moments and saying, oh, they lead back to this, they lead back to this, they lead back to this. And you get to a point where once you've allowed the awareness to take more importance than staying away from actually dealing with the pain, that's when you're like, okay, now I know what this looks like, and I know it's going to hurt because I'm used to this person, I'm attached to this person. You know, I went through a period of time in my life where I couldn't imagine my life with this person. I imagined the whole future with them. And how could I let go of all of that? Well, my inner peace is more important than just someone saying, I want you in my life, period. That's what I would say to that person. Yeah.
Inner peace is more important than that person.
More important than that bond, that fictitious bond that you see. That's like, it's like a, you know, the medicine that they give us with a dripper.
Yeah.
That's what a trauma bond feels like. It's like they're giving you like scraps. And the reason that you think you can't live without those scraps is that you think that scraps is all you deserve.
Yeah.
Even though on a logical level, you know you deserve more than that. You know that maybe I don't know what I deserve, but I know I don't deserve this, or I deserve more. But what you're used to, what you've gotten used to over the years, because of that root pain that you have, that root belief about yourself, that's telling you we've never had more than this. Like, if you let this go, you're not going to get anything at all. So like, just live with it, and you know, it'll get better with time. But it doesn't. You go through a cycle. You're like, you get really angry and you're like, I don't deserve this, and blah 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 blah, and then I'm gonna leave, and you try to leave inside of you, and it freaks you out because you don't know what it feels like to actually live with the voices inside of you, to actually listen to yourself. Like, it's easier for someone to tell you I love you, and for you to translate that into I am worthy of love, than it is for you to tell yourself I am worthy of love on your own without someone telling you that. Right?
Yeah. It's the scraps. It's those things. It's like what you said earlier with that intermittent reinforcement. You know, it starts off with the love bombing, and you remember that, and the memory becomes so like ingrained in your mind, and you feel like, okay, they've been that person before, and then it diminishes and it diminishes and it diminishes. And you get to that point where if they give you like one compliment, that's like the smallest compliment ever, you're like, oh my goodness, look how amazing this is. And that is like, you deserve so much more than that. But yeah, it's your nervous system that's kind of stuck in that area. So bringing peace and into your own body, and recognize, going into those thoughts and not avoiding those thoughts and those feelings, because that's really what keeps us there, is that avoidance, not wanting to confront them and just be with them, and it keeps us stuck. So it's really powerful. Just to be mindful of time, I want to go into one more question. And there's one question that says, what steps should I take after realizing I don't have a home within me?
The very first step is actually realizing that you don't have a home within you, because so many people don't even see that as the issue. Like, I remember hearing people who are in their 30s and 40s and 50s talk about how awful the dating scene is, and how awful relationships are, and how like every relationship I've been in is like this or like that. And when I came to the realization that the reason that relationships leave us feeling so lonely and depleted and turned off from relationships is that we define our value by someone telling us the love, kindness, respect, empathy, everything beautiful about you that you have to give is worthy of being welcomed into my home. Like, you think that someone taking the love that you have to give and welcoming you into their life, that's what love is. It's not. Love is already within you. You don't need to give and give and give and give to the point of you don't define yourself without that giving for it to be love. And if you don't have, like, so I'll give you a practical example. This is what usually happens, what causes so much disappointment in relationships. You're having a really bad day. Or your partner's having a really bad day, and you, being the person that you are, you draw them a bath, you make them dinner, you offer them to listen, you do all these things. And then when that happens with you, you go to them with the expectation that they're going to do the same, but they don't. And you get disappointed and you start feeling like, well, why am I even in this relationship, and why? But the truth is, you have to come to yourself first before you go to someone else and say, I demand this from you. Like, if you were really at home with yourself, you would love it if somebody did that for you, but you don't see yourself as not worthy of love because that person isn't willing to do it for you. Like, I asked the question in Welcome Home when I talked about self-love, and I gave this exact example. I said, you do A, B, C, D, E for the person that you love when they're going through a hard time. Do you do that for yourself? Probably not, because you think it's selfish to do that for yourself. You think that if you take time for yourself when you need it, it's taking away from time that you need to be giving to others. That if you went and bought something for yourself, it means that you are taking away from, paying for something for your children, or paying for something for your partner, or whatever. You believe that giving yourself the same kind of love that you give to others is selfish because you are the one choosing to give it to yourself. And that's the complete opposite of self-love. Self-love means that you love yourself as the number one person in your life, the number one loved one in your life. And the beauty of that is, once you take that position in your own life, people who give you any less than that, or who make you feel like you're selfish for wanting that for yourself, they won't even come near you, because they won't get that kind of importance from your eyes, like, towards them. They just won't, because you aren't trying so hard to convince someone of your worthiness of love. You already know you're worthy. So, and that's, I know that this is taking longer than expected, but when people get into relationships where at one point they say, like, I was the one who gave him a chance, and I was better than him, and I always gave him so much, and now he's leaving me, like, how? Well, right? Like, you hear that all the time, and you're like, how? Well, it's, you made a decision to equate your worthiness of someone's love by depleting yourself. I'm not blaming the person at all, but I'm bringing some clarity. You thought that being a martyr, like putting everything that you have and giving it away and whatever, that's the price of getting love in return. And it's not the price of getting love. Has no price. And when we talk about unconditional love, we don't mean love me when I am an awful person to you, or love me when I'm abusive towards you, or love me even though I really don't invest much in our relationship. Unconditional love means I love you as you are. I don't need you to, I love your sensitivity. I love how much you care. See, people start coming up with excuses saying, oh, he left me or she left me because I expressed too much emotion. Well, what about this? I love how much you care about people around you. And I see how it hurts you. And I would, just as your partner, I am telling you that I think you would feel so much better if you didn't overextend yourself so much. What if they told you that instead of saying your sensitivity or your empathy is too much? Like, people always have a choice to either value what you have or see the value in it, even if they don't have that quality, or to make you feel like something is wrong with you because you have that. you know? So honestly, this whole conversation always comes full circle, because if you stop perceiving your worthiness of love through someone else's eyes, through someone else's home, under someone else's roof, and you start seeing it like under your own roof and your own eyes, then you won't feel like it's your fault that someone chose to see you a certain way or treat you a certain way, or that they chose to change the way they treat you. You know, that beginning part of a relationship, think about it this way: we always want to be the best version of ourselves that we can be when we're in a new setting, right? Who wouldn't want a new chance at being the person that they want to be, right? And then, so people show you their true colors over time. And it's not necessarily to say that, you know, that person was a bad person. Maybe they genuinely wanted to do their best. But now that you're seeing them more often, you're talking to them more often, they are forced to show you more of their true self than they were at the beginning. They're not putting on a show. They're not taking that time to get ready and get emotionally ready and mentally ready before they see you and say, make sure you don't say this, make sure you don't say that. Now you're seeing who they truly are. And now is your time to say, when someone shows me a part of themselves that I am fundamentally not okay with, I am okay walking away, and I am okay cutting my losses and saying, before this depletes me even more, I am going to put an end to it. I'm not going to, you know, water a dead plant. I'm not going to water a plant that's dying right in front of me until it becomes dead. Like, I see where it's going. The petals are drying out, even though I keep watering it. You have to be okay with what you think is giving up on people. You're not giving up. You are just choosing yourself. Like, what's the point of being in a relationship? Honestly, ask yourself, what is the point of being in a relationship? Is it to avoid the loneliness? Is it so that your friends and family can say she got married by a certain age? Is it so that they could say she had kids by a certain age? They're so lucky, they're going to grow up together. Like, what is the point of being in a relationship if it's not for you to genuinely grow, feel like you're a plant and you're actually blooming? You do not need it in your life, and you do not want it in your life. And I know this sounds like very inspirational, but if you tell it to yourself enough times, you will start seeing the value of cutting that cord, of ending that relationship, and become your own hero, you know?
Yeah. Always such a deep conversation with you. I could talk to you for
we could
5
talk
days
for hours.
Literally for hours.
We're gonna have to have an episode 2. We could have so many conversations, and like each question could be like an hour long. You're so I love your insight. I love your tips. I think a lot of our listeners, the analogies, everything. I think a lot of our listeners are really going to resonate with you. And I'm sure they're going to want to follow along with your new ventures. I know you have a book coming out in June. Is it this year?
Yes, June
this
1st.
year, June.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's going to be exciting. Can you let our listeners know where they can find you?
Yeah, so I am on all social media platforms. It's the same username everywhere. It's just at Najwa Zebian, NajwaZebian. And all 3 of my first books are available wherever you buy books. And Welcome Home is actually the biggest one yet. It's already even before I wrote the whole book, like when I just wrote the proposal, we already sold it into, I believe, 6 different languages. And there's a book fair coming up soon where it's going to be pitched again. And I just know now that the whole manuscript is out there, like, this is the deepest I've ever gone. And I was vulnerable, but not in a way that is like, let me bring you with me to the root of my pain and just like let you dwell there. It's more like I am doing this as a service to myself and as a service to anybody who's needing to like authentically heal and be authentically themselves. And so I walk you back to it, and I bring you back to where I am today, so that you can walk back to the root of your pain and know just how much you're capable of doing if you just took that step to say, I am my own home. Before anyone else is my own home, I am my own home. I'll end with this. There's a powerful poem by Nizar Qabbani, who's a Syrian poet, that I used to absolutely love. Like, I would put it everywhere. And it says, a woman doesn't want a rich man or, a man with riches or whatever. A woman wants a man who, when she comes to him, he puts his hand over his heart and says, here is your home. And I used to love that poem. And now I say, I don't need a man to tell me that. Like, I can look at myself in the mirror and say, I am my own home. I don't need to wait for someone to tell me, welcome. I want to look at myself and say, welcome home to myself. And so honestly, you'll see, this is not a book. This is genuinely transformational. Like, it's stories within stories and strategies within strategies that are going to change the life of whoever reads it. So I'm so excited for it to come out.
I cannot wait. I'm so excited. So excited for this. Well, thank you for spending some time with us and letting us get to know you on a deeper level, and your insightfulness. It's going to help. What the work you're doing is helping so many already, and you're just going to continue doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Join the Anxious Like You community by following @AnxiousLikeYou on Instagram. See you in the next episode.